Just one day after our engagement, my fiancé's family sat me down and gave me a list of things I had to do for them to prove I was worthy enough for their daughter. When I refused, her dad threatened to beat me up, so I decided to break off the engagement. Now my ex-fiancé is going around blaming me for not being a man enough. I was engaged to my fiancée, Tina, and we were planning to get married in the next few months. However, things took an unexpected turn, leading me to break off our engagement after I was basically threatened and bullied by her family. To provide some context, Tina and I come from very different family backgrounds. I'm an only child, and both my parents are researchers. And growing up in a stable and supportive environment, I had the privilege of focusing on my education and personal development. My parents worked hard to give me a comfortable life, emphasizing the importance of values, independence, and mutual respect. Tina, on the other hand, comes from a lower-income family and is the eldest of 6 siblings. Her childhood was marked by challenges that I cannot even imagine. Her parents always struggled with various addiction issues, which put a strain on the family's finances and stability. As Tina and her siblings grew older, her parents shifted much of their financial burden onto the children, expecting them to provide for the family. When I first started dating Tina, she was very upfront about her family situation. She explained how she sends money back to her family every month to help them with their expenses since her parents didn't have a stable job. Beyond that, she also sends money to her siblings whenever they need something, which, as I quickly learned, was quite often. Her siblings would constantly call her for various things, and she would have to send money. Whenever Tina hesitated or refused to meet their demands, her family would guilt-trip into giving them what they wanted. They would tell her how, as the oldest, it was her responsibility to take care of them and that family is family, so she had to be there for them. For me, this was entirely new territory. My parents had never expected me to pay for them. So, coming from a background where financial independence and boundaries were the norm, I often encouraged Tina to consider cutting ties or setting firm boundaries with her family. I genuinely believed that allowing her family to constantly take advantage of her was unhealthy. However, Tina always made it clear that this was her business and something I shouldn't interfere with. Whenever the topic came up, she would push back, sometimes even accusing me of being inconsiderate. She would argue that I didn't understand the importance of family obligations because I'm an only child and have never experienced the kind of responsibilities that come with having siblings. She often implied that my perspective lacked generosity or empathy. So after multiple times of hearing this, I decided to step back and respect her wishes. After all, it was her money, and she was entitled to make her own choices about how she spent it. I didn't want to push her or strain our relationship over this issue, even though I could see how much her family's constant demands were draining her emotionally and financially. It became a topic I avoided bringing up at all. Instead, I tried to be a good and supportive partner to her. During the 2.5 years that Tina and I dated, I made it a point to support her in every way I could. Financially, I always took care of her, not because she asked me to or expected it, but because I wanted to. I believed in being a gentleman and providing for her as a way of showing my love and appreciation, whether it was her nail and hair appointments or date nights or even vacations. I was always the one covering the costs without hesitation or complaint. I genuinely wanted to make her feel cared for and valued. It was my way of showing that I was invested in her and our relationship. This month, after 2.5 years together, I finally popped the question and proposed to Tina. I thought our relationship was going great, and we needed to take the next step. When she said yes, I was on cloud 9, excited for what lay ahead and felt certain that we were entering one of the happiest chapters of our lives. The very next day, Tina's parents invited us to lunch at their home. I assumed it was their way of congratulating us on our engagement and welcoming me officially into their family. Wanting to show respect and appreciation, I didn't think twice about accepting their invitation. However, when we arrived, I quickly realized that this gathering was far from a celebratory occasion. As we sat down at the table, Tina's family wasted no time getting to the point. They told me how thrilled they were that I was going to be Tina's soon-to-be husband, but they made it clear that in order to join their family, I had to prove my worth to them as well. I asked them what exactly they meant by proving my worth. Was it not enough that I loved Tina and was committed to building a future together? Did I really have to jump through hoops to try to win their approval as well? This is when her father handed me a to-do list, as he called it. In the list were various things that he expected me to start paying off for them as a way to show him that I was really ready to be his son-in-law. Among the demands were paying off the family's mortgage, covering an outstanding education loan, renovating their kitchen, buying them a new car, and more. At first, I thought he and the rest of the family might be joking with me. Maybe this was a prank, and they wanted to pull my leg. But their serious expressions and unwavering tone quickly dispelled any notion of humor. I glanced at Tina hoping for an explanation or at least some reassurance that this was all a misunderstanding. But to my shock, she sat silently, staring down at her lap, avoiding eye contact with me. Her silence felt deafening and unnerving, leaving me feeling blindsided and unsupported. I looked at the list again, and these weren't small gestures or reasonable requests. They were massive financial undertakings completely outside the realm of what anyone could reasonably ask of a future son-in-law. I was utterly taken aback. It was one thing to know that Tina's family relied heavily on her for financial support. I had long accepted that this was part of their life, but to demand that I assume this responsibility as a prerequisite for marrying Tina was beyond anything I could have imagined. Trying to make sense of the situation, I turned to Tina and asked what her family meant by these demands. Instead of answering, she remained silent and her father took the opportunity to speak for her. He explained that since Tina was their oldest child, she had always been the primary supporter of the family, helping them financially as much as she could over the years. Now, with Tina being the first of their children to get married, he claimed it was only logical and fair that I, as her partner, would take on at least half of the family's financial burden also. He went on to argue that I was financially well off, so fulfilling their request shouldn't be a big deal for me anyway. His casual tone made it sound like he was talking about something as trivial as borrowing a cup of sugar rather than major financial matters like paying off their mortgage loans or other significant expenses. I scoffed at his casual entitlement to my money and asked him outright if he had lost his mind. I told him in no uncertain terms that there was absolutely no way I would be paying for any of their debts or expenses. Yes, I was getting married to Tina, but I wasn't marrying them. I wasn't about to take on financial responsibilities for people I barely knew or liked. I couldn't fathom how they even thought this was an acceptable thing to demand. I turned to Tina again, desperate for her support or at least an explanation. I asked her why she was staying silent while her family was making such unreasonable requests, especially when it was about our future and my money. Finally, she spoke, but what she said only made things worse. Tina told me that she didn't think her family's demands were unreasonable. She said that as her man, it was my duty to take on some of her responsibilities at least, and that this was the purpose of marriage, to share responsibilities. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I was completely surprised by her answer. She had never discussed this with me before. Before I could argue with her, one of Tina's sisters chimed in, backing her up. She pointed out how unfair it was that Tina and I enjoyed such a good lifestyle while the rest of the siblings struggled to pay bills and lived in poverty. Tina's brother also joined in, adding his opinion with a smug confidence. He declared that since Tina had been sending the money every month without question, it was now my turn to take over as her husband and help them. No questions asked. According to him, only a real man would have no problem doing this. At this point, I honestly felt like I was losing my mind. I pointed out the irony to Tina's brother. He was a man too. So why was he expecting me to take care of their family finances instead of stepping up himself? Her brother seemed offended by this, and I then turned to Tina and asked her directly if this was her intention all along. Did she really plan on letting me take care of her family after marriage? Did she expect me to pay off their bills and debts? Because if she had told me about it earlier in our relationship, I would have made it clear right then and there that my answer was a firm no. Frustrated, I pushed further and asked why she had never discussed this with me before. To me, this entire situation felt deceitful and manipulative. Not once had she mentioned this plan, which apparently she and her family had for me throughout the entire time we dated. I told her bluntly that this was exactly how gold diggers operate. They use their partners for financial gain while keeping them in the dark until it's too late. The moment I uttered the word gold digger, the room erupted into chaos. Tina's parents began yelling at me, claiming I was going too far and that I was being disrespectful to her. Her father repeated that asking for money from their future son-in-law was perfectly normal and not a big deal. Her mother chimed in, insisting that this was a family obligation and that I needed to start acting like part of the family if I wanted to marry Tina. Tina, visibly embarrassed but still defensive, argued that this was something any woman would expect from her partner. She doubled down on the idea that I was being selfish, bringing up the fact that I'm an only child and don't understand what it means to have a large family. She even tried to reassure me that all I had to do was pay off everything on the to-do list and promised that her family wouldn't ask me for anything more in the future. But as I looked around the room at her family's faces, all I saw were the greedy, calculating faces of people who knew exactly what they were doing. They were jackals, and I felt like a complete fool for not seeing it sooner. For years, I had trusted Tina and overlooked the red flags thinking it would never affect me, but this lunch had made everything crystal clear. Her words were the final nail in the coffin. They revealed a sense of entitlement that I simply couldn't overlook. As much as I had cared for Tina, I knew then that I could never marry someone who viewed my financial stability as a resource to be drained for the sake of her family. I shook my head, feeling a mix of disbelief and clarity. I then turned to Tina and told her if she wanted to call me selfish just because I didn't want my bank account to be drained, then she was right. I was selfish. I was selfish enough to not let them convince me to be their meal ticket for the rest of my life. The fact that she supported their demands only proved to me that she had always harbored this ill intention and had probably been hiding her true self from me the entire time. I asked her outright if she really saw me as a naive person who she could just marry and manipulate into taking on her family's burdens. Hearing this, Tina's face flushed red, and she began stammering and denying everything I had said. And she insisted that I had significant savings and came from a stable financial situation while she and her family had nothing. Tina argued that it wasn't even that unfair for her or her family to ask me for financial help. In her mind, the fact that I had so much meant I should easily be able to help them out without hesitation. At this point, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to regain some composure. I had always prided myself on being an intelligent and discerning person, but in this moment, I realized just how thoroughly I had been played by this woman I once thought I knew. It was a sobering realization. This wasn't about love or partnership anymore. This was about what I could provide and how much she and her family could extract from me. When I opened my eyes, I looked differently at Tina and told her I wasn't going to argue with her anymore. Clearly, she expected me to step up and provide for her family, but I couldn't do that. And since she needed a man who would, there was no point in us staying together anymore. I made it clear that we were done and that our engagement was officially off. Tina looked at me in horror as I told her that she needed to find someone else who would be willing to be her family's scapegoat or better yet, their golden goose. Then I asked for the engagement ring back. Tina had insisted I buy her a large diamond ring, and I had bought it because I wanted to make her happy. However, if there wasn't going to be a wedding, I saw no reason for her to keep it. This is when Tina and her family immediately started arguing with me. Her sisters began shouting, accusing me of breaking my promise to marry her. Tina herself, now teary-eyed, kept pleading with me to take some time to think things through, saying that I was making a rash and overly harsh decision by breaking off things with her. She assured me that if I just calmed down, I would realize that her family's requests weren't unreasonable and that we could still work things out. Her father, on the other hand, became more confrontational. He angrily declared that I had no right to break his daughter's heart after she had dedicated 2 vital years of her life to me. He acted as though I was some villain for walking away, ignoring the fact that their behavior was the root of the problem. He even suggested that after everything Tina had sacrificed for our relationship, I had no choice but to keep my word and marry her. Otherwise, he and his sons would beat me up. Despite the threats, the shouting, and the pleas, I stood my ground. I told him I didn't care what they threatened me with because there was nothing in this world that would make me marry Tina after what I had just found out. I had made my decision and no amount of guilt-tripping or intimidation was going to change it. I informed them that if they so much as touched a hair on my head, I would call the police on them and sue them with every penny I had. That shut Tina's dad up properly. Meanwhile, Tina continued to cry and refused to give me the ring back. I didn't want to argue with her father and left without saying another word. I felt completely drained emotionally, mentally, and even physically. I couldn't bear to be around Tina and her family any longer. Since then, the aftermath of our breakup has been complicated. Tina and I have a lot of mutual friends and everyone's opinions have been sharply divided. A majority of them seem to side with me. They agree that Tina's behavior was deceitful and opportunistic, and they have openly labeled her a gold digger. They believe she knowingly kept her family's expectations hidden from me until I was fully committed to the engagement, and they agreed that I had every right to walk away from her. However, there are a few, mostly some of the women, who feel differently. They express that in their opinion, I should have at least considered helping Tina's family out financially in some small way. They argue that supporting your partner's family is just a part of being in a relationship, especially when one partner comes from a less privileged background. They believe I was too quick to dismiss the idea entirely and that I could have tried to find a compromise, even if it didn't mean fulfilling all of her family's outrageous demands. So I'm on Reddit to know if I really did a bad thing by breaking up with Tina. AITA? Update 1. Hello, guys. I've just found out that Tina has been going around telling people that I'm not man enough because I refused to take up any of her family's burdens and left her like a coward. She's even gone as far as to claim that any woman who marries me in future is destined to have a horrible life because according to her, I'm selfish and only think about myself. These accusations are not only untrue, but deeply unfair. Considering how much I gave to our relationship and how I treated her with love and respect up until the moment her family crossed the line. For those who are asking how I could have been with someone like Tina without realizing her true nature, believe me, I had no idea. Do you really think I would have spent over 2 years of my life with a woman who expected me to fund not only her lifestyle, but also her family's? Absolutely not. If I had seen any signs of this behavior earlier, I would have ended things immediately. The truth is, Tina was the one who pursued me from the very beginning. She's the one who approached me, asked me out on our first date, and always seemed completely captivated by me. She always portrayed herself as an independent woman who was simply weighed down by her family. And that's why I stayed with her and invested in her and gave her everything she wanted without hesitation. I never questioned her intentions because for 2.5 years, there was no reason to. However, overnight, everything changed the moment her family laid out their outrageous demands, and she sided with them. That's when her true colors came to light, and I saw the side of her that I hadn't seen before: the entitlement, the lack of boundaries, and the willingness to justify their behavior as acceptable. It wasn't until that moment that I realized how drastically our values and priorities differed. To those who believe I should have handled things differently and not walked away from her, I can only say this: I know my worth, and I know what I bring to a relationship. I'm not a selfish person. I'm a loving, generous partner, but there's a fine line between being supportive and being exploited. Marriage is about building a life together, not about one partner draining the other financially or emotionally. Tina and her family crossed that line, and I did what anyone with self-respect would do. I walked away. I absolutely agree with several commentators who have pointed out how lucky I am to have discovered Tina and her family's true intentions before we got married. I can't even begin to imagine how much worse it would have been if this had all come out after we tied the knot. Looking back, I think the reason they thought they could spring these demands on me and expect me to simply go along with them is because up until now, I've always been the kind of person who has supported Tina through thick and thin. I'm also usually a quiet person who avoids conflict. For instance, whenever I used to meet Tina's family for lunch at a restaurant, I always picked up the tab. And when it was Tina's birthday, I went all out and paid for everything to make her day special. Even when Tina went out with her siblings to see a movie, grab dinner, or do anything else, I was the one who would always book their tickets, pay for their cab fares, and cover other expenses. I did those things out of love for Tina. I thought I was doing something nice for the people she cared about. But now in hindsight, I can see how they may have interpreted my kindness as a weakness to be exploited. To them, I must have seemed like a bottomless ATM, someone they could slowly start taking more and more from without question. I think they assumed that since we were now officially engaged and about to get married, I would naturally accept their financial expectations as a part of their family. What they didn't expect, obviously, was for me to stand up for myself and say no. Their aggressive reactions to my refusal, Tina's father's threats, and her siblings yelling, and even Tina herself trying to guilt me, only confirmed that they fully intended to manipulate me into fulfilling their demands. They never imagined I'd push back or see through their behavior, and that's why they lashed out the way they did. While this entire experience has been difficult, it's also been an important wake-up call for me. I will never let another person take advantage of me this way ever again in the future. Luckily, Tina and I were never living together. She lives in an apartment with some roommates, and we were planning to move in together soon after the engagement. Now, of course, all those plans have been completely derailed by everything that happened with her family. I packed up whatever things of hers I could find around my apartment: clothes, personal items, small things she left behind, and I'm going to mail them back to her as I don't want to see her ever again. Update 2. A lot of people have been telling me to reach out to Tina and get the engagement ring back from her, insisting it's mine and I should take action to reclaim it. But, honestly, up until now, I didn't want to be bothered by her or her drama anymore. I thought, let her keep it if it means she'll leave me alone. It was one less thing I had to deal with anyway, and I figured it wasn't worth dragging myself through more of that mess just to get a piece of jewelry back. However, tonight, my ex showed up at my doorstep drunk and yelling at me. She was pounding on my door, demanding that I open it and talk to her. Of course, I wasn't about to do that. I wasn't going to let her in, especially after everything that had happened. I have a Ring camera, so I figured I'd ask her what she was doing there and why she was making a scene outside my place, causing a disturbance for my neighbors. Tina yelled at me about how much she missed me and how she wanted us to get back together. She said I had no right to just leave her after she had made up her mind to marry me. She insisted that I had insulted her and her family over something as silly as money and that I should have just accepted their demands. Tina even went so far as to tell me that money would come and go, but that the love we have for each other was apparently what mattered the most. However, I could hear how manipulative she sounded, how she was trying to justify everything, trying to make me feel guilty for something that in her eyes was no big deal. I couldn't believe how far she had fallen in my eyes, how she could be so blinded by her own sense of entitlement. The feelings I once had, love, affection, trust, were gone. All that was left was pity and disgust for her. I told Tina as calmly as I could that I had made it very clear that we were done. I had spent so much time and effort supporting her and her family out of love and courtesy. But expecting me to be their cash cow forever was something I never signed up for. I had always been patient and understanding towards her family, but this was crossing a line I couldn't ignore. Tina responded by arguing that this was just how all marriages worked and that I needed to educate myself on how these things went. I snapped back at her, telling her I was really tired of her generalizing and assuming that this kind of behavior was acceptable. It was irrational of her to expect her partner to shoulder the financial burden of her entire family. I told her that up until now, I had genuinely felt sad for her. I understood the pressure she felt to support her family, and that's why I always paid for her things throughout our relationship. But now I realized that she was just like them, using me for money. She had probably waited for me to propose and marry her so she could then force me to take on her place. Hearing this, Tina looked offended, but I could see the truth in my words hitting her. She began arguing with me more, but I was done. I told her she needed to leave my property immediately, and if she didn't, I would call the police. At that point, Tina began to beg me to unblock her on my phone at least, but I refused. I told her that I didn't want to speak to her ever again. I had no more patience for her manipulation or games. In the end, she stormed off after kicking and cursing at me through the door. Update 3. It's been 4 months since my last update, and it's been a lot to process, but I finally moved out of my old place. Right now, I'm staying with my parents while I search for a new home. It wasn't an easy decision, but I didn't have much of a choice. You see, Tina and her family have continued to harass me all this time, and it was making living at my old place unbearable. I had to get out of there for my own peace of mind. Over the past few months, I've also had to distance myself from some friends who were still siding with Tina. They've been pleading with me to give her another chance, but it's clear they don't understand the gravity of what she and her family tried to do to me. I've had to go to the extremes of changing my phone number and email address as Tina kept reaching out from various numbers trying to get in contact, and I couldn't keep dealing with the constant stress. After talking things through with my dad, we're now planning to get a restraining order soon. I don't want Tina to ever show up at my new place or even at my parents' place drunk and yelling at me again. Initially, I thought she was just having a hard time accepting our breakup, but I don't want to tolerate that kind of behavior anymore. It's sad that things have come to this, but I have to protect myself.